Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Quarles-Mowrer, and I would like to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. This morning, we once again carve out sacred spaces in our homes to join in our virtual sanctuary. We will have music played by the lovely Carly Schell, and we'd like to send a shout out to Rick Dusky for once again being our head Zoomer today. Thank you. For over 50 years, the UUFP has been a liberal religious voice in the Pottstown area. As UUs, we believe that reason and wonder can coexist, that we can honor the teachings of those who have gone before, even as we explore our way into the future, and that no one is outside the circle of justice and compassion. We hope that your spirit, your heart, and your mind are refreshed as we commit ourselves once again to our 7 guiding principles. In this time, more than ever, we embody the words of Kenneth L. Patton, we arrive out of many singular rooms. We gather here this Sunday morning still within our singular rooms, reaching out across space, our hearts connecting, even though our hands can't touch. We gather not because we share a creed, but because we share a promise to support one another on our spiritual journeys. Our services are different each week, but the loving kindness we offer one another in this community remains the same. So whoever you are, wherever you are, whomever you love, we are glad you came to be with us today. And now we have a moment for announcements. So if you have an announcement, you can wave at the screen and Rick will unmute you. And I don't see any announcements. Wow, okay. So even in this time when technology is so vital in providing us with connection, it can still distract us from one another. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to put your notifications on silent, and then I invite you to take a moment, take a breath, rest your eyes, and listen to the bell. We don't have a chime this morning, we have a bell. Would you like to ring it? We light a chalice this morning in memory of the chalice flame that during World War II served as a beacon of hope in the fight against oppression. The words to think on this morning are by Sean Parker Dennison, How to Survive the Apocalypse. First, learn to listen, not only for enemies around corners and hidden places, but for the faint footsteps of hope and the whisper of resistance. Hone your skills, aim your heart towards kindness, and stockpile second chances. Under the weight of destruction, we will need the strong shelter of forgiveness and the deeper wells that give the sweet water of welcome. We have a place for you. When the world ends, we must not add destruction to destruction, not accept a beggar's bargain to fight death with more death. In order to survive the apocalypse, any apocalypse at all, we have to give up the counterfeit currency of self-sufficiency, the mistaken addiction to competition, the lie that the last to die has somehow survived. Now let us pause in a moment of reflection and listen to a musical offering from Carly. This is The Human Touch Can Light the Flame, which is number 307 in Singing the Living Tradition. Thank you. For opening words this morning, let us take courage from the words of Mark Morrison Reed. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone, our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. But together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. And now Carly will play one verse of Faith of the Larger Liberty, which is number 287 in Singing the Living Tradition. Even though we can't all sing together over Zoom, I love listening to the hymns. It reminds me of the words. The reading for today is called There Is No Easier Way by Elizabeth Wynne. Now, this is a message that I'm a little resistant to. I actually read it over a couple of times thinking, I don't know if I want to talk about this, but I thought I was resistant to it in much the same way that I'm resistant to doing lunges. Like, I know lunges are good for me and I know I need them, but in fitness, as in life, sometimes the exercises we like the least are the ones we need the most. So there is no easier way. She writes, I once saw a little sign carved in wood that read, there is only the hard way. Many of us have been harmed by the theology that told us that suffering was a sacrifice that would bring us closer to God. Many of us were told that our suffering would redeem us, even when we knew that actual redemption would have been free from suffering to begin with. Many of us are only here because of the sacrifices of others. So much of what is possible to carve out in this world requires some giving up, some letting go, some sacrifice. That is the truth of that little wooden sign. There is no easy way. There is only the hard way. In particular, the work of justice often asks us to do impossible, hard, terrifying things. There is no easier way. There is only this one hard way. Folks with more privilege sometimes get caught up here. Oh, if it's hard, maybe we're doing it wrong, we tell ourselves. We are lulled by our experiences of choosing between a hard choice and an easier one. Folks with less privilege know that many of our choices are between one horrific choice and another horrific choice. We learn to live with that and keep going. Many of us want to do the right thing, the just thing, the generous thing, and also to somehow not have to give anything at all. We want to share our opinions, but not actually donate our evenings or our weekends or our doing the dishes while on conference calls to understand the work enough to be able to offer meaningful thoughts. We want people to trust us and let us shape the vision, but not actually risk inviting folks out to tea or dinner or beers or church to build a relationship that endures and carries us forward. We may want to post the cute meme without actually making the phone call to the city councilor or state representative. We want to be part of that powerful, courageous, game-changing direct action without the long past midnight planning meetings, the messy decision-making, the frayed relationships, and the constant wondering if this is even worth it. We want to talk about being bound together in interdependence without actually giving our guest room to a stranger or our paycheck to someone we've never met or turning our schedule inside out to do what needs to be done. The word sacrifice might be too much mess for some of us, or too tainted by oppression and coercion. What matters more is that we are willing to live our lives in the shape of what is being asked, and not hope that what we are asked to do will fit the shape of our lives. In this time when we're putting physical distance between ourselves and our neighbors and our coworkers and our friends, it's sometimes difficult to feel close enough to connect over the parts of your life that are important to you. If you are weighed down with sorrow or bursting with joy, please take this time to share what you feel with us. And as with announcements, you can kind of wave at the camera and get to be unmuted. All right, I don't see anybody waving at the camera. Spirit of life and love, be with us today as we celebrate with one another and comfort one another. Let us take a moment to reflect on our many joys and sorrows that are held silently in our hearts. And now Carly will play hymn number 83, Winds Be Still. Thank you, I love that one. Okay, so now comes the part of the service that I am just figuring out how to do. So we'll see how well this works. I'm going to try to share my screen. All right. And next thing's next, I have to pull up my talk on my phone. Okay. So this is my sermonish part, equal protection. How do I get this? There it is. Once upon a time, a group of honest and true patriots were oppressed by the laws of a faraway king. The king taxed their imports and taxed their exports and expected them to house soldiers in their beds and feed the soldiers the food that should be nourishing their children. And when they tried to tell the king that his laws were not fair, the king said, well, you can sail across the sea and complain at the time that I like. And when some brave men did so, well, their complaints were dismissed. So the men decided the king was too greedy and too far away to be fair, and that they did not want to follow the king anymore. So they fought and they fought and they fought hard through bitter cold winters, and eventually they prevailed. They set themselves free from the tyrant king, and they created a new government, a government without a king. But how would they structure this government? It took a few tries, but eventually they decided upon 3 branches of government with laws made by an elected body, laws carried out by an elected leader, and judges to make sure the laws they make and carry out are fair. And we lived happily ever after. So this is the fairy tale that we are told about our founding. And parts of it are true. Parts of it are exaggerated and glossed over, but we are taught that we escaped tyranny for liberty. We, the people. And we kind of assume that the people includes all of us. Well, the truth, as truth always is much messier and more detailed. For example, when you look at the writers of the Constitution, when you got to see that picture I flashed up there, you saw that they were all male and they were all of European descent. And not just European descent, but like certain countries in the west of Europe. The language of the Constitution does not directly rule out the participation of females in government. It uses this person must be XYZ age, or this person shall be. But it does state, for example, that a representative must be an inhabitant of the state in which he shall be chosen. Now, at the time, he was considered the default when the gender of a subject of a sentence was unknown. However, considering the culture of the time, when they said he, they probably meant he. Another thing that kind of gets left out of the story that we hear is that slavery is actively built into the Constitution. It's not just that slavery is allowed, it's that slavery was part of what they decided on at the founding. For example, Article 1, Section 9 talks about the importation of people. It says, migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. So we can bring in new slaves and we can't make laws to abolish it for at least 20 years. Also, Article 4, Section 2 says that enslaved people who escape from bondage have to go back. It says no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered upon claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. As in, if you are born into slavery, good luck. There are also specific mentions of the Indian nations, specifically excluding them from citizenship if they do not pay taxes. Article 1, Section 2 directs that Indians not taxed be excluded from the census. And people who are excluded from the census are denied representation in this representative government. By the way, this is a census year. Have you filled in your census form? Have you been counted? We've often heard of the Constitution as a living document, which means it's flexible enough to change with the times. For example, the Fifth Amendment states in part, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. In the annotated Constitution that's available at constitution.congress.gov, the Fifth Amendment is annotated with the line, our whole system of law is predicated on the general fundamental principle of equality of application of the law. Equality of application, that's what they tried to establish with the Fifth Amendment. But in 1866, after the Civil War, they needed to be more specific. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Before that, even if you were, before they specifically said it in the 14th Amendment, even if you were a free person of African heritage who was living in a particular state and was the descendant of an enslaved person of African heritage, you could become a state citizen, but you could not be considered a US citizen. So they decided that they were going to fix that in 1866. And surely saying we can't deny any person within the jurisdiction of the United States to the equal protection of the laws, surely that will be enough to guarantee that all people will be treated equally under the law, right? Well, the truth is, our laws are only as powerful as the people and institutions who we entrust to uphold them. So I decided I wanted to learn a little bit about the Equal Protection Clause after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. She was a champion of equal rights, and our country is the poorer for her passing. She originally made her name for herself in the 1970s while working with the ACLU, where she won several victories that had to do with discrimination on the basis of gender. She made a name for herself with laws such as Frontiero versus Richardson in 1973. This was a case that established that both men and women should be entitled to military survivor benefits. And she was involved in the case Craig versus Boren in 1976, which struck down an Oklahoma law that allowed women to purchase beer at 18, but restricted men to purchase beer until they're 21. Now, these laws, the interesting thing about these laws is that the people who were victimized by these laws were not women, they were men. However, these and other victories in the same vein ensure that the 14th Amendment would be interpreted to ensure equality of the sexes. Well, if you say, oh, well, you can't discriminate against men, well, of course you then cannot discriminate against women. Now, among her notable Supreme Court cases are the United States versus Virginia. Now, this is a landmark case which struck down the male-only admittance policy at Virginia Military Academy. Now, the state of Virginia had tried to argue that, oh, well, they could just open a female military academy and it would do the same thing. But as we know, you can't discriminate and then say separate but equal, because of course it won't be equal. In Steinberg versus Carhart, she struck down a law limiting abortion. In her personal opinion, she was with the majority opinion, but her personal opinion, she wrote that the state cannot force a physician to use a medical procedure other than that which he or she deems safest. In Lawrence v. Texas, she was involved in the majority opinion that struck down a Texas sodomy law. The majority opinion held that the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause protects private consensual relationships. The law has no business interfering with the liberty of you deciding who you love. And Grutter v. Bollinger, which upheld affirmative action at the University of Michigan Law School. So the University of Michigan had put some weight on your background, on your race. And they were trying to argue that that is discriminatory. But what the majority found was that it's a narrow enough scope to say we want to have enough people to make a difference with people forming relationships. Because if you only have one person, well, then that one person gets to represent all of their race, all of their religion, all of their people of their background, and that's not enough to actually build relationships. Well, nowadays, thanks to the work of people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, thanks to the work of people all up and down the government, our country is more just and more fair than it was at our founding. But that does not mean that our work is done. Just as in earlier generations that determined that the Fifth Amendment was not enough to ensure that justice is applied evenly and added a 14th Amendment, we needed a 15th Amendment in 1870, a 19th Amendment in 1920, and a 24th Amendment in 1964 that all state basically the same thing. Voting is a right that shall not be denied or abridged. Whether you are descended from enslaved people or slaveholding people, you have the right to vote. If you are African American, Asian American, German American, Italian American, Native American, American American, you have the right to vote. If you identify as male, you have the right to vote. If you identify as female, you have the right to vote. If you do not identify with either gender, you have the right to vote. Whomever you love, you have the right to vote. If you are rich, you have the right to vote. If you are poor, you have the right to vote. It's fundamental to our country. And I know that we are a congregation of engaged people. I've heard you guys at coffee hour talking about getting your mail-in ballots or waiting to go to in-person voting. And we say before each and every election that this election matters. And you know that's true. It's true because every election matters. Our founders created a government that was not ruled by the whims of inheritance and genetics. We do not have to hope and pray for a competent king. We can elect 2 competent senators, a competent representative, a competent president, a competent vice president, all of whom we will expect to steer the nation on that long arc that bends towards justice. That is our sacred trust as citizens, building this land together, striving for a more perfect union, establishing justice, and ensuring the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So may it be. Our closing words are a benediction by Tom Shade. My friends, there is a power at work in the universe. It works through human hands, but it was not made by human hands. It is sustaining and transforming power, and we can trust that power with our lives. It will sustain us whenever we take a stand on the side of love, whenever we take a stand for peace and for justice, whenever we take a risk. Trust in that power. We are together held by that power. And now Carly will play us a benediction before we extinguish our chalice flame. Thank you. We extinguish our flame with the words of Maddie Stefantis. We extinguish this chalice flame, but we keep its light in our hearts, with its message of love and justice, taking it outside our 4 walls, out to the whole world we live in, until we are together again. Thank you for joining us today, and please stay for our virtual coffee hour.